Hi, welcome back. Now, we continue our study of the UCC. The UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code, is a contracting system. And as you will recall, a contracting system must do three things. First of all, it must tell us the valid requirements of a contract. What are the requirements to create a valid contract? It must give us guidance for the performance of a contract. And finally, it must provide remedies in the case of a breach of contract, a failure to perform. Now, so far, we've been talking about that first element. What are the requirements of a valid contract? And now we move into the second, having to do with performance. And we start our study of performance by looking at these three things: title, insurable interest, and risk of loss. Those are three separate items that are relevant to this discussion. So, title. Title is a legal term for a claim of ownership to a property. It is formal notice to the world of your ownership of property. Sometimes it's reflected by a document, like the title to your vehicle. But title can exist even without a document accompanying it. Now, when we sell goods, the sale of goods involves the transfer of title from a seller to a buyer. And in that lapse of time between contract execution, both parties agreeing to the sale, and acquiring title, there may be things that occur during that time period. And one of those things is damage to the goods. So we have to allocate who is going to bear the risk of loss during the time between the contract execution and title vesting in the buyer. So in this lecture, we're going to study these three concepts: title, risk of loss, and insurable interest. And after this lecture, you should be able to answer the following questions. What is the concept of title? How does it pass? What is risk of loss? What is insurable interest? And what are the different kinds of sales contracts? And how does each type affect title passing, risk of loss, and insurable interest? Let's start with title, and specifically the passing of title. How does title transfer from the seller to the buyer? Well, when the goods exist and they are identified in the contract, title may pass to the buyer. We're going to talk a little bit more about identification in a few minutes. But right now, let's say if the goods exist and they are specified in the contract, then title can pass to the buyer. And the UCC states that title may pass in any manner in which the parties agree. If the parties do not specify when title passes, the UCC provides the default rules. Remember, it's a gap-filling device. So let's look at those default rules, the various possibilities regarding the passing of title. Let's start with, if the goods are to be shipped, title passes to the buyer once the seller meets its shipping obligations. Ordinarily, in a shipment contract, which is the default type of contract, the seller meets its obligations when it places the goods in the hands of the first carrier to take the goods to transport them to the buyer. If the goods are not shipped and remain stored, then title is going to pass whenever the seller delivers a document of title, say a warehouse receipt, to the buyer. So when that document of title is transferred from the seller to the buyer, title follows that. Now, if the contract does not require shipping or delivery of documents of title, title passes to the buyer when the contract becomes effective, when it's executed, as long as the goods are identified in the contract. Now, the UCC has a special rule regarding title when it comes to what we call good faith buyers. The UCC says that a buyer acting in good faith can acquire valid title to goods that were improperly obtained. Now, what is a good faith buyer? A good faith buyer is someone who acts honestly and provides reasonable value for the goods. A good faith buyer must have no knowledge that the goods were obtained improperly. What this means is that title can pass from a seller who does not have good title to a buyer and thereby transfer good title, if the buyer is a third party acting in good faith and giving value for the goods. Now, there are three kinds of title. Good title, well, sometimes called clear title, acquired from someone who owns the goods free and clear. So if I have good title, I am able to transfer that good title to a third party, and that third party obtains the goods with good title, with a clear title, with no attachments to the title. Another type of title is what we call void title, and void title generally involves theft. So if a seller has obtained goods through theft, the seller cannot transfer good title even to a good faith buyer, a buyer in the ordinary course of business. The third type of title is a little more complicated. It's what we call voidable title. And in this case, the seller acquires the goods through fraud or deceit. Generally, and what you can look for in your own test, is they provided a hot check. Check with insufficient funds in the bank. A person who acquires goods through fraud or deceit may still be able to transfer good title so long as the acquiring party is acting in good faith and without knowledge of the the improper acquisition of the goods. So a seller has voidable title if the goods it's selling were obtained by fraud or deceit, meaning you misled someone into giving you the goods, paid for with a dishonored check, meaning a check with insufficient funds to back it, purchased from a minor, or purchased on credit when the seller was in fact insolvent, meaning the seller bought the goods on credit even though the seller did not have the means to pay for the goods. So voidable title.